Hello, Business Law 3000. We're going to go over Chapter 3 today. I appreciate all your emails, and I'm so happy to be going over this next chapter with you. So I'm just going to share my screen like last time. Here we go. Get right into it as quickly as possible. All right, so welcome again. This is week number 2, chapter 3. We're going to be doing chapter 3 and 4. So this is ethics and business decision making. So some people say ethics and business, they don't go hand in hand. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of business people out there that agree with that, but there are a lot of circumstances you have to take into account to make the right decision for your company. Reputation, as someone said, can be built for years, and then it only takes one poor decision to ruin it. So let's get into some of the material. Our objective of chapter 3 is to determine what business ethics is and why it's important. We're going to how can business leaders encourage their companies to act ethically? Ask that to ourselves. We're going to also ask, how do duty-based ethical standards differ from outcome-based ethical standards? Our other learning objectives are, what are the 6 guidelines that an employee can use to evaluate whether his or her actions are ethical? Sometimes there's a lot of gray area and it's hard to determine whether you're doing the ethical thing. There's different, and then what types of ethical issues might arise in the context of international business transactions. So like the picture shows, sometimes something may be legal, but it may not be ethical. Ethical might lead you in a different direction. Sometimes doing the ethical thing can be hard because it might be less profitable, but in the long run, it could benefit your company, your reputation, and profit in the long run. In the short run, a lot of decisions are made to prop up profit. The stock market always looks at the quarterly reports, and some companies lose money to plan for the long term. So there's always like a short-term, long-term ethical dilemma, and there's also legal and versus ethical decision making that could be a dilemma as well. So as an introduction, ethics is not defined as a law or laws, but it can have a tremendous impact on a business's finances and reputation. So, some companies crash and burn based on their decisions that are legal, but if they're not made in an ethical manner, they could be the demise of that company. Or if something is found out to be a profitable situation, but seems unethical, sometimes consumers change their mind about that company. So the main ideas on chapter 3 are that the philosophical basis for making ethical decisions, there are many, and there also are there's the application of business ethics to global situations, which is more difficult because global climate, other countries have different perceptions on ethics and what is right and wrong and what is the best decision for a company to make. Sometimes it's in the best decision for the state. China, for instance, a lot of companies are state-owned. So international differences can cause a lot of problems, and we'll go through that as well. Business ethics. They're focused on what considered right or wrong behavior in the business world and how a business person can apply a moral and ethical principles to a situation that arise in the workplace. Business ethics are important. They're becoming more so because a lot of investors want to invest in ethical businesses that are sustainable and focus on the greater good. I'll go into that as well. There's a new legislation that just got offered up for people who want to invest in more sustainable businesses. So profit maximization and the rise of corporate citizenship are two important factors, but business ethics are very important. So ethics, I'm going to go back to Aladdin just because I'm following a theme here. It was not intentional, but I thought, hey, watch this merchant scene. I cannot play it. Like I said, it just takes up too much bandwidth to play it and record it. But watch this scene of this merchant in the beginning of the movie. I don't know how many of you have seen all of Aladdin, but I grew up in the 80s and 90s, so it was one of my favorite. And so ask yourself, is this merchant being ethical? And how far can you go in sales puffery in terms of saying your product is wonderful and then having it not turn out to be that great? So take a look, and it might make you chuckle, but you know, best movie from Disney, I think, in my opinion. Oh, okay, we won't play that though. All right, business ethics. You look at a few different implications and decisions when you're making a decision that's ethical. Though most people will evaluate whether there's the legal implications of each decision. Also, you'll look at the public relations impact of your business decision and the safety risk for consumers and employees. And then you look at the financial implications. So those are the 4 factors. And so the main point of this chapter is that corporations should strive to make ethical business decisions and evaluate each decision carefully, looking at those 4 factors. They should look at all the stakeholders in each different decision, which can be time consuming. And sometimes, I know for me, when you're a business person or even just an employee, you want to make a decision quicker than slowly. But it's good to look at all the different implications of each action for your changes in your business or your anything that you decide to do. You should consider the benefits of long-term profit maximization over short-term profit maximization, and how the internet can affect your reputation if something comes out about your decisions. You want to have a strategy to create a favorable company image so that you look like you're doing good for the world, which sometimes can be difficult. So an example I came up with is that only 12% currently, from 2017 data, only 12% of employees receive paid maternity leave currently. Most women have to choose between physically recovering from childbirth and bonding with their baby, and the other choice is just making a living. So I'm very lucky. I work at Wayne State full-time, and they provide family leave up to 12 weeks of paid time off. So I'm one of those lucky few. But if you've seen from maybe 2010 up till now, more companies are just deciding to offer paid family leave, not just maternity leave. And it's a way of having a good reputation and also attracting employees. And it's kind of a long-term profit maximization, because the fewer employees that leave due to childbirth or family circumstances changing, the more money that company will really retain, because it takes a lot of training and time and effort to have a new employee come on board. If one leaves due to birth or childcare issues or what have you. So I just wanted to point out that this isn't a good example of ethical decision, business decision, but looking at all the different reasons why it would benefit the company, but also benefit employees and also the reputation of that company. I don't know if you read the news much, but there's always a new company that's coming out as having more paid leave than another one. I think I read Facebook provides 6 months of paid family leave. Right now, under the US federal laws, there's the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, and it only provides 12 weeks of non-paid time off to be with a child, a newborn, and it's only if you work for a company that's 50 people or more, and it's only available to employees if they've been there at least a year. So it really doesn't cover that much right now, and considering how many women are in the workforce and also men who have little babies coming and same-sex couples or what have you, there's a lot of changes that need to be updated possibly in the laws, but companies are saying this is in our best interest if we retain our employees. So let's have paid family leave instead of waiting for the government to do anything. So whether you disagree with it or not, the reason why a lot of them are making this decision is that it's in their best interest, and it's an ethical decision as well. So just because an action is legal does not mean it's ethical. So just reviewing that point, sometimes compliance with the law is sometimes called a moral minimum. So just because you can do something does not mean you should. So ethics is really not really a business law per se, but it is kind of a one step above business, the law of business. It's looking at your decision making and thinking about the global impact. So ethics is a difficult subject for corporate officers. They usually look at just profit and figures of what's working, what's not in the bottom line, and it's also highly subjective. It changes over time. Different people have different opinions about what's ethical and what's not. So it can be a convoluted and controversial subject if you're talking about any particular decision. So most companies have an internal code of conduct, or also some companies have what is called a mission statement. That kind of indicates what the purpose of that company is, or what is an expected conduct, what is expected conduct of their employees to reach that mission statement. So I'm not sure if any of your companies that you work for have these types of things, but it would be interesting to know if you've read an internal code of conduct on ethics, or just on your conduct, or whether you saw an employee handbook that had some type of ethics portion in it. That's pretty common these days. So business ethics and social media, there's a little section about that. Businesses face ethical issues with respect to social media platforms, such as Facebook and Twitter. Employers today may conduct internal internet searches and see what kind of postings you have, just to see if they can be associated with you in some ways for ethical reasons. Employers may look at but not interfere with your social media posts of their employees, but there are some caveats to that. Any kind of work technology that's given to laptops, a cell phone for work, they can have a policy or a requirement that you don't use it for personal use, including social media. So those are some of the things to keep in mind. Companies also may have policies regarding the use of your social media, but they must be very careful when considering a disciplinary action for violations of those policies. There's, of course, the First Amendment of the Constitution allows free speech up to a point, but also, there is an at-will employee circumstance where working for a company is at will, meaning they can let you go for any reason. They don't need to give you a reason either. So at least in Michigan, it's an at-will employee state. So it's something to keep in mind, because if you say something controversial on social media and it gets back to your employer, there can be consequences, unfortunately. So there's different approaches to ethical reasoning. Ethical reasoning is the process in which the individual examines a situation in light of his or her ethical standards. There's two approaches to business decision making, which is duty-based ethics, implying that there are certain rights that everyone is allowed to have, and then there's outcome-based ethics, concerning the consequences of your actions. So duty-based ethics comes from religious beliefs, follow the fundamental rules of moral action, and then there's philosophical reasoning, such that as the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who identified some general guiding principles for moral behavior based on what he believed to be the fundamental nature of human beings. A potential problem for those who support a duty-based approach is deciding which rights are more important in a given situation. There could be multiple duties in the same situation: duty to oneself, one's community, one's customer. Management constantly faces ethical conflicts and trade-offs when considering all those affected by a business. There's the firm's owners, there's the employees, customers of its products or services, the suppliers, the community in which it does business, and then society as a whole. Then there's the outcome-based ethics, which is utilitarianism. It's considered people using this method think of the greatest good for the greatest number of people usually. It's based on the philosophical reasoning of Betham and Mill, and it applies a theory. You need to apply this theory, you need to think of the cost-benefit analysis and weigh the positive, with the negative to see which is a better outcome. So to get a better idea of what this approach to ethical reasoning really is, I, of course, included a short snippet about it. And so take a look. And then there's the corporate social responsibility approach, and it's a combination of duty-based and outcome-based ethics. It combines a commitment to good citizenship with a commitment to making ethical decisions, improving society, and minimizing environmental impact. Corporate social responsibility is becoming more popular. Some of the bit larger corporations don't really take into social responsibility as much, but you'll see this more of a talked about subject with possibly some of the more younger companies that are producing new IPOs on the stock market. Sometimes they have a corporate responsibility based company, so you really know why they're doing business, what their commitment is, and it might be just a newer focus than it once was. So a number of theories based on the idea that corporations can and should act ethically and be a accountable society for their actions exist. There's the social aspects, stakeholder approach, and then corporate citizenship. The social aspects include that corporations must demonstrate they are promoting goals that the society deems worthwhile and moving towards solutions to social problems. I'd say this is a newer approach to a lot of corporations, but there's a desire that people want to invest in companies that have a worthwhile goal to make society better. There's the stakeholder approach. It considers all groups affected by corporate decisions, not just stakeholders. Shareholders, excuse me. A lot of bigger companies only think about the shareholders, I would have to say. But the younger companies or companies that maybe don't have a more global impact are thinking about all the different stakeholders, their community, their customers, their employees. There are some companies I've noticed that sell groceries that are a certain type of company that is owned by employees. So that's a way to give more of a stakehold to different people other than the shareholders. There wouldn't be any stock in that circumstance, but the employees would have a stake in the company. Then there's corporate citizenship. This approach is when corporations demonstrate they are promoting goals that society deems worthwhile. So this is one example I came up with in terms of an example of ethics and making investing decisions. It's kind of on the other side of things. Instead of running the company, thinking about where you want to put your money in terms of the stock market. Congressman Levin introduced legislation aimed at sustainable investments. He really looks at environmental, social, and governance factors that help the long term in our world. And so he wanted to have investors know more about companies who are supporting environmental, social, and good governance factors. So his legislation is calling on Fidelity to tell possible investors the environmental factors of a company, the social factors, and then any good governance that's going on. So it's just one way to understand a company's goals better, and sometimes it's not really straightforward. If you just read about them in the news or something, you don't really know what their environmental focus is or their social good focus is. So it's important to know more about what you're putting your money into. Okay, so making ethical business decisions. To make ethical decisions, employees can use 6 widely accepted guidelines. Companies once considered leaders in their industry, such as Goldman Sachs, were brought down by the unethical behavior of a few, according to this book. It could be a company culture, though, as well. So you saw the Enron video. You kind of saw the deception that the board of directors and everyone was a part of. The employees were not necessarily aware of what was going on with their accounting practices. So really, it should be the top management and owners should lead by example and use a systematic approach to reaching ethical decisions, so everyone is aware of them. So these are the 5 different guidelines. So there's the law, like I said, is the action you're considering legal? So that should be your first question you think about. Number 2, you should think of the rules and procedures. Does this action follow company rules and procedures? Number 3, your values. Does the action follow laws and company policies that reinforce society's values? Conscious. Do you have a guilty conscience about the action you're about to take? Some people have somehow diminished their conscious reasoning skills. So for instance, in that Enron video, they were doing accounting that was improper. I've read some books about it. Our Senator Carolyn, who works at Wayne State Law School, he had a whole investigation on Enron, and they were doing improper accounting practices generally. So somehow the people who were doing those things were not guilty, did not feel the guilt. They were just trying to maximize profits. So sometimes it's very hard to ask yourself, do I feel guilty about this? Because sometimes you're just doing something to preserve your job or to get a bonus or what have you. But try to get past that and really think about guilt. Okay, number 5, promises. Will the action live up to the commitments you have made to others, both inside and outside of the business? So did you promise to X, Y, or Z. I don't know, I don't have an example, but number 6, heroes is what you are planning on doing an action that one of your heroes would take. Think about someone you really look up to. Would they do the same thing? It's always good to think about someone you look up to taking the same exact action to consider whether they would do it. So here's an example of a issue that may seem very unethical, but somehow has gotten pushed aside by Walmart. Walmart is such a big company, and so they subcontract out to different companies around the world to create clothing and other items for them. In this video, there's a $10 clothing item that's being made for Walmart. It's not a direct contract with this company in Bangladesh, I believe it is, but it's a subcontract. So they don't have direct knowledge of it, they could probably claim, but to get a $10 item, they're probably not paying very good or high wages. So I doubt they really look into it. That might seem unethical. They don't have any way to test whether people are getting poverty level wages or not. They probably don't care because really they're just trying to make profit, which is understandable, but thinking about it ethically, they should consider some of these issues because their reputation, Walmart does have a reputation for breaking labor laws or not caring about who's making their products across the world. So in this case, it's women and also some young children, not children, but like 12-year-olds who are making these clothing items. There's no emergency exits in these facilities, and there's no way to put out a fire. Basically, it's just one big sweatshop. So take a look at the video and think about how could Walmart make a better ethical decision in this circumstance, and did they make an ethical decision? And then my question is, how do American companies value workers in other parts of the world? Is it easy to take, turn a blind eye in hopes that you maximize profit? I've heard of Apple doing the same types of things, having underage youth making their phones or technology, and they're kind of their position is that just don't tell me and we don't want to know. So it's something to consider. Okay, so on the other side of the spectrum, the good part, I think, is that companies are changing on their own because of making cost-benefit analysis and ethical, cost-benefit weighing. So in this case, a lot of companies that you would think are oil companies are actually turning to renewable energy lately. They are changing. They're changing on their own. People are wanting more green energy. In fact, I own stock in DT Energy, and one reason I bought them is because not only are they oil, do they make profit from oil and gas, but they're putting a huge amount of their investment into green energy. So nowadays, you don't have to invest in a solar panel company. You can invest in these large companies that are changing on their own because they see that green energy is cheap and it's plentiful, and it's something that could really benefit the world and the future. So there could be hundreds of thousands of jobs in green energy if we change more quickly too. So I mean, there's so many benefits. So take a look at this Wall Street Journal clip on will the green energy boom last? I really do believe it's going to become even bigger, but you take a look and you consider whether it is or not. Okay, so now we're going to get into global business ethics. Given the various cultures and religions throughout the world, it is not surprising that conflicts in ethics and frequently arise between foreign and US businesses. There's a few notable differences related to, number one, the role of employment law governing workplace conditions. Number two, the practice of bribing foreign officials to secure favorable contracts. So these are the two main differences, just like the Bangladesh women working for poverty wages and the underage young girls there as well. You know, a lot of people know that they're probably underage in that facility, but they just turn a blind eye because not only does the young girl need the money, but the company doesn't really care that they're underage. So it's a problem, you know. At least she has a job. She's providing for her family that's living in poverty. But on the other hand, you know, we all wish that young people could get an education and find something else before having to go to work. So, and then the practice of bribing foreign officials, that is very common in some countries. You have to bribe or give some kind of monetary reward to get a contract, a business contract. In some countries, I remember working on some cases like that. When I was in law school, there was someone who got in trouble for bribing, a big company that got in trouble, but that was the common practice in China to provide some kind of monetary kickback, I guess you'd call it, for a business deal. So this is your example about doing business in China. There's the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is a US statute that prohibits firms and individuals from paying bribes to foreigners and foreign officials to further business deals. Both the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice are responsible for enforcing this act. And like I said, I had direct experience using this act and trying to defend a company for violating it. It's so easy to violate it in China, though, because if you want to do a big transaction, you have to give something to a foreign official. So I wanted to also let you look at this huge settlement by JP Morgan. They settled for a bribery case in China. I only saw a brief part of this, but basically it goes on to explain that they were hiring foreign officials' children in exchange for business dealings. So that's violating a bunch of US laws, but in China, that's perfectly normal. So that's one of the ethical problems, is how do you do business in a foreign country when their norms are totally different than your own. So one of the problems, and you know, I wish there was a simple answer, but there is not a simple answer. So employment practices also are a concern. So like I showed that Bangladesh film, once you see it, you'll see that foreign companies exploit its workers all the time. If the workers in around the facility that's producing shirts, for instance, if they live you know, in poverty and they have more power to hire them at a low wage, they're going to go for a low wage. And sometimes they hire children at below minimum wages as well. Our country also did this back when we were just an industrializing country. We would pay children in 1910, 1920 poverty wages to do some of the most dangerous things in the world, which was like coal mining. Some of them did some industrial type chemical work. If you go back and you look up child labor laws and how they became possible to even pass, it's because so many children are dying doing dangerous things in the US. So we have our own history of paying below minimum wages to children, especially for foreign and children who are immigrants. As it's just part of the unfortunate history that we have. But how do we prevent that now with you know, contracting outside of the U.S.? How do we do that? After a company may audit its roles and see where contracts are actually going, and it reveals numerous violations. In 2012, supposedly Apple released a list of its suppliers for the first time, showing any violations it had. But Apple, like I said, has continuously violated labor law. If the U.S. had, if Apple was actually creating the products here in the U.S., they would have to pay a lot more money and also hire different people, because they continue to hire underage people or at below minimum wages as well. So this is an ongoing problem for huge conglomerate companies. Do they maximize profit over these ethical concerns? A lot of them choose maximizing profit until something comes to their attention where their reputation might be at stake, and then they decide to do something. So I don't know, I'm kind of skeptical about companies being able to make really good ethical decisions that are really big companies, because usually once a company gets a certain level, maximizing profit and shareholder return is really their only focus, it seems like to me. So here's an example of our not so distant past. This was the biggest fire that occurred and killed the most people in New York City at the time. 9/11 exceeded the amount of people who have died from a workplace accident, I guess you could call it, or workplace tragedy. But this really caused laws to change. So take a look at this video. It's about the Triangle Fire accident in New York City. So I believe that's the end of this chapter. So if you have any questions, please email me, and we'll continue from there. Thanks so much.